I pick up my 5.5-year-old. How's your day at school? Fine. Like, what? You're 5.5. Like, I should be telling you to be quiet. Like, there's just like, I'm like, did you have fun? Yep. What'd you do? Nothing. I'm like, no, not yet.
Yeah.
Like, don't do this yet.
Right. Well, the thing is with students, with teens, with kids, they're modelers.
Mm-hmm.
So they are doing what they see, right? And
so
they are picking up from the interactions of adults.
Yeah.
They're hearing responses.
Mm-hmm.
A prime example.
Well, now you're convicting me, Doug. I do not appreciate that.
Well, this is personal too.
What's up, Foothills family? This is episode 24. We've done 24 of these bad boys. Unfortunately, that's over the span of like 2.5 years. But Wendy's helping us again. Woo! I am here with Pastor Doug McNett. Hello, Doug.
Hi.
He's the youth student ministries leader. Is that the official title? Student ministries pastor at our church. And so we're going to talk about student stuff, youth stuff, and parenting stuff and all this kind of stuff. Because what do parents love? When people younger than them tell them how to be parents. Best thing in the world. So we got a good conversation. Doug doesn't think he's going to do very good.
Nope.
He's going to, because God has given him a good mind and heart for students. So we're going to get into it. And let's just kind of quickly start with 2020 was obviously a crazy year as far as students go and them adapting to all this stuff. Can you just give me kind of a quick what our students kind of dealt with in 2020 going into 2021 and kind of maybe how that's brought your youth ministry to the point that it is now?
Yeah. So what's super interesting is that this generation specifically, so if we're talking basically anybody born after 2000, okay, so if we're going 2000, 2021, and everything in between that, they're already a very unique generation.
Mm-hmm.
They're the first generation to solely grow up with technology in what we know of it today.
Right.
And so their access to information, they're more isolated. Those aspects have already made them very unique compared to all generations before. Mm-hmm. So there were studies happening in 2015, 2016, 2017 talking about a higher level of anxiety. There were studies being done about how they're more isolated or have higher levels of depression, how the access to information was so readily available that it started to cause a disconnect between students and parents, students and schools, because they had everything they need. They could double check everything they need. They don't need people, right?
Right.
So those are just some of the things that happened. And then all of a sudden you enter into 2020 where isolation took on a whole nother level.
Right.
But they're still connected.
Mm-hmm.
And so it creates this deep confusion where they're not around people, but they're still engaging in people in a facade, I would say.
Sure.
The development of the Finstagram, where they have these fake Instagram accounts,
right.
Which all kind of affects who they are, how they operate, how they think. And then you add on top of the isolation, the turmoil, the unknown. Mm-hmm. The political unrest, the pandemic unrest, there's just so much that anxiety was already elevated, and now you enter into this place and it gets even higher. And then across the region, you have people who are really liberal, people who are really conservative. It seems like there isn't much of a middle ground anymore. And so students are now feeling not only are they isolated, but then they're feeling like they have to pick sides and that they can't just be in the middle and go, I see value in that, or I see... and then their access to information, which is so one-sided often.
Totally.
Just
echo chambers all over the place.
It gets more and more. So very, very, very interesting and unique time to be a teenager.
Yeah. I think that's interesting that you point out that kids trying to choose a side kind of thing. Because, I hear that. I have little kids, so they're not really dealing with that as much. But that would be a challenge as a parent who has very strong-held beliefs, political ideologies, whatever, to like, where is that line between, like, well, I want them to be informed and understand, but I don't want them to feel like my way or the highway,
Mhm.
Whatever. Like, that is a challenge to kind of give your kids a little agency, give them enough. I mean, because teenage years are kind of the time when, some of that separation stuff should begin, and, a little more freedom and whatever. That must be a challenge as a parent of teenagers, much more sentient beings than my 3 and 5 year old, to wrestle with some of that stuff. And I think we'll actually talk about some of that wrestling a little later. And we talked about in the last podcast I did with Amy, uh, of just studies that have been done on the amount of technological advancements historically. Like, it took forever, when it was the Wild West and it was all this kind of stuff. Like, but nowadays, like, this truncated technological boon that from 2005, I think, when the iPhone was invented, to now or whatever, just the amount of information that is available to us, like, our brains have not adapted to the ability to ingest all of that in a healthy way. And so in 2020, when a lot of people are stuck at home, stuck on social media, stuck on whatever, getting so much info, if they didn't make the choice to push that out, then yeah, anxiety rises, depression rises, anger rises, all of these different things, because we can't, like, we just can't. Like,
Well,
we can't.
right. And then on top of that, like you're talking about parents who have held strong beliefs, either religiously or politically, not only are the students then bumping up against that because they're in the peak and the prime of trying to figure out who they are and what they believe.
Right.
And they don't necessarily, just because it's your parents, immediately align with what the parents believe.
Right.
They're in a questioning stage,
Right.
which often then causes conflict within the home because
Right.
the parents take that personally as they're
Right.
questioning our beliefs or my beliefs,
Right.
whether it be religious or political. And then not only is the information an issue, students spend an average, and this is an average. I would
Sure.
actually, I think it's maybe a lot more than this, but an average of 3 hours a day on social media on their phones.
Sure.
And so the information they're getting in that 3 hours is a lot. But students are starting to realize they can't trust what's on the internet.
Right.
Like, we joke, right? As adults, we'll joke
Sure.
all the time. Well, I read it on Google, so it's true, right? Well,
Yeah.
students believed that.
Totally.
And for a long time, they were like, well, if I Google it and that's the answer, then that's the answer.
Right.
Well, now this thing has happened in the last 2 years. People have had way too much time on their hands,
Right.
where students are now unable to trust what they're seeing online. If you get on TikTok at all, or if you get on Snapchat or even Instagram, they make these videos that are 6 seconds, 8 seconds long,
Sure.
10 seconds long, but they use green screens.
Right.
People in their homes now.
Right. Oh,
Could you
totally.
imagine when we were kids using a green screen?
I know.
That's
been like,
crazy.
Future movie maker here.
Right?
Like,
But
yeah.
but everybody has access to it now,
Totally.
and their phones can do it, and they can splice, and so, but they've gotten so good at it that you can't tell anymore
Right.
what is real and what's not. So there's videos going on right now
And
where
deep
people are
fakes and all that stuff.
and that's
Yeah.
more advanced, right?
Yeah.
But even kids, where they'll see some crazy trick online and they'll be like, "Wow, I didn't know you could do that with a skateboard."
Right.
And then the next 6 seconds is them showing them how they just tripped. It was all
Right.
fake.
Right.
Well, it seems funny in the moment,
Yeah.
but what that's doing is teaching kids not to trust what they're seeing,
Yeah.
not to trust what they're hearing. And it's actually causing a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
And so you have these students who are in a place of trying to figure out what they believe and what their parents believe, and they don't know, well, what I just saw on Instagram wasn't real. How do I know what you're saying is real?
Right.
Right? So it's really created a confusion and an anxiety that's through the roof.
Right. Yeah. Well, and one reason that I was so jazzed to get my girls, again, who are very young, back into church post 2021 is because to them, reality is kind of like, it is what they hear from us or what they see in, like, TV shows and cartoons and whatever. And I'm not okay with my kids thinking Jesus and Mickey Mouse are of the same relevance.
Yeah.
And unless there's unless we intervene in some way and say, I'm going to put you into a church community and Sunday school where you hear people who have vibrant faith in Jesus, what's the difference to a kid?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like there just isn't a difference. And so, I was very excited to get them back into church community for that specific reason. So as far as the students that you engage with, I mean, obviously you're kind of in the bubble of our church primarily, maybe barring camps or something with other churches. What are some of those trends that you've seen as far as like how kids identify? Are you seeing more kids because of parents and the craziness of 2020 being like, I'm a conservative or I'm a liberal and here's my stance? Are you seeing them defined by social media and groups? Is it family? Like, what are some of those things, if that question makes sense?
It does, and it is a little bit more challenging when we're talking about teenagers because they are, and I think we tend to forget this as adults and as parents. As a parent of teenagers, I'm having to check myself and remind myself of the developmental stage that they're in. Often because I have expectations,
Sure.
and often those expectations are just kind of internalized within me, and then are portrayed in my actions and how I talk, and I don't often explain them. And so I have to remind myself, okay, they're in a developmental stage of identifying,
Right.
of discovering.
Right.
And so it is hard to look at a generation that is in where it is right now with technology and confusion and anxiety. It's hard to say, okay, so what are they identifying? What is influencing their identity? Because really everything
Yeah.
is influencing their identity.
That's fair.
Right. And so if you even think like, if you think you've got younger kids, they like to play dress up.
Yeah.
Right. That continues and progresses. You know, Spirit Weeks, they do Spirit
Totally,
Weeks where you
yeah.
dress up and,
Just had one.
Right. So they do that still in high school, and
Yeah.
they do that in junior high. And the reason that schools do this, super interesting, is because it boosts morale.
Right.
Well, and you wonder, well, how does dressing weird in different colors
Sure.
and different costumes, how is that boosting morale? Well, because we're talking about an age group who is trying to discover and identify different aspects of themselves.
Right.
And they often, check this, don't feel safe in doing so. So the school is giving them permission to do something weird.
Right.
To dress
and
a different way.
It kind of unites everyone because everyone's kind of doing it.
Yes, so
You
there's
feel like
no,
part of
I
the
don't
team.
feel outcast. I don't
Right.
feel isolated anymore. We are doing this, and
Right.
it's accepted.
Right.
Right. So it's just it's an interesting time for students to figure out their identity because they're doing it constantly. So right now, I would say the culture is imposing on teenagers a choosing identity. You must choose something.
Right.
And so it is putting a pressure on students to choose political sides or religious sides, in more Christian or not Christian.
Sure.
And unfortunately, Christians are known in the world right now as what they're against more than what they're for. And so if a student identifies, I'm a Christian, it automatically, to the world around them that doesn't have any awareness of what actual Christianity is,
Sure.
it immediately puts them into a box, isolates them even more.
Yes.
Well, same thing politically. Now, wherever you're at regionally, like we live in a really conservative area.
Sure. Yeah.
It is less dangerous for a student to be convicted conservatively than liberally.
Right.
And so you'll even have students who don't think that way, don't identify conservatively, but they would say they do.
Right.
Because they don't feel like they can say anything different. You go to Pondo, well,
yeah,
you're totally a conservative. I mean, right? That's just
that's the prevailing.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Your beliefs on masks or vaccinations, like they're having to choose sides right now, and that is really creating an identity of radicalness, because students are no longer able to go, well, I kind of see value in vaccines. I see value in vaccines that have been tested and they've been working on for years, and we've been proven that they're safe and healthy. I don't feel good about a vaccine that just got developed. They can't say that.
Sure.
They can't have that.
I mean, a lot of times just in culture in general, those are hard conversations.
Right. But students are feeling cornered to make those decisions without...
Which is so sad.
Yeah. They haven't been able to process. They haven't been able to have... Because then they come home and parents are often one-sided. And so what's happening is these students are now identifying as this is who we are. This is what we believe in. We can't go outside of that. But internally, they're panicked. because they don't really believe that, because they haven't thought it through, they haven't owned it,
Right.
and so they're feeling like they have to pick a side without having the information they need to do that, because they can't trust what's on the internet,
Right.
and they know that their parents are one-sided, right? So it's really confusing.
Yeah. No, I mean that that is very interestingly put. And I don't know that I had necessarily just kind of considered that inner struggle. I mean, when I was in high school, I identified as like a rocker. I hung out with the goth kids.
Yeah.
I didn't know who local elected officials were. I didn't need to.
No.
It was just not a concern. And part of that is because of technology and social media and all that kind of stuff. And I have, considered the effects and harms of that kind of stuff on kids, but not necessarily in this way. Yeah. Gosh, I just think that it's so sad that students feel a pressure online to do it, that sometimes they'll feel that pressure at home. And again, as I posed earlier, like, I understand the inclination as a parent. I am a Christian. I want my girls to have a loving, vibrant relationship with Jesus more than anything. Politics are a little like, I'm not like you, whatever. But, I have my political beliefs and I will express those to my kids. And, on certain ones, I'm like, yeah, I get that. And on certain other ones, I'm like, I don't get that. And I disagree. And those disagreements will be difficult. I mean, that's hard to suck up as a parent. But I want my kids to feel comfortable talking to me about these issues that they're feeling and these stresses that they're feeling and all that kind of stuff. I want any youth listening, I want you to be able to talk to your parents about it. And that might be a challenge. I mean, depending on your parents and their bent and their openness and all that kind of stuff, I would challenge parents to let your kids process and not judge them, but give them good conversations. Because there's a lot of stuff they're probably not telling you because they don't feel safe. And I mean, that is something that I pick up my 5.5-year-old. How's your day at school? Fine. Like, what? You're 5.5. Like, I should be telling you to be quiet. Like, there's just like, I'm like, did you have fun? Yep. What'd you do? Nothing. I'm like, no, not yet.
Yeah.
Like, don't do this yet,
right. Well, the thing is, with students, with teens, with kids, they're modelers. So they are doing what they see, right? And so they are picking up from the interactions of adults. Yeah. They're hearing responses. A prime example.
Well, now you're convicting me, Doug. I do not appreciate that.
Well, this is personal too. If I could just use a dog as an example, if a dog comes to me, I have a friend right now who has this cute little dog. Okay, super cute. Since the first time I saw this dog, I get super excited when I see it. I pet it all, and I'll pick it up and snuggle it. Yeah. And ever since then, every time I'm around this dog, it runs to me, jumps up like it wants me to pick it up, and I hold it and I cuddle it. Compared to a dog who, if it comes up to you...
Are you comparing my children?
it comes up to you and you're like, hey, get him. Yeah. That dog's going to remember that the next time it sees you. Right. It's not going to run up and be all friendly, right? Well, our kids are doing the same thing. They're watching our interactions. They're watching our response to what we see on the news. Sure. They're hearing when we go, oh, Trump, or, oh, Biden. They're hearing what our bent is, and they're internalizing that, right? So they're seeing when we come home and we say, hey, babe. And she goes, how was your day? And you go, it's all right.
Yeah.
They're picking that up.
Right.
They're also picking up, hey, I got my progress report. And the parent opens a letter. I only know this because I've seen other parents do it.
Right. Now that you're safe.
Yeah. I open the letter and I go, seriously? What? How did... And then I try to catch myself. It's too late. Yeah. My son's defeated.
Yeah.
And next time he brings a progress report home, he doesn't want to give it to me.
Right.
because he knows my reaction,
Yeah.
right? And so we have created, and I know, especially if you're a conservative, I am, you don't like the safe space conversation. But let's just be honest, it's a reality.
Sure.
You either create an environment that is open and people want to talk to you, engage with you, or you don't.
Right.
And so students, unfortunately, because they're children, they're not us, they're not adults, they need that safe space to have conversation. But because we're not intentional as often as we should be, or as much as we should be,
Right.
we end up teaching and creating an environment where it's like, I can't tell my parents I'm addicted to porn. If they were to find out, a study was done a number of years ago between the secular, the Christian, even Catholic, like Protestant Catholic, on communication between parents and teens and what they're willing to talk to them about. They could not find a difference between teens and, let's just say, religious homes and teens in non-religious homes. They were all equally uncomfortable sharing certain information with their parents because of shame, embarrassment, the response of the parent. Our response to things have created within teenagers, within children, a lack of vulnerability or authenticity, a lack of openness, because we're just going through life, right? And things take us by surprise.
Right.
So a student comes home and they're trying to figure out who they are, and they go, I think I'm bisexual. The parent loses their mind,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so especially if you're from a Protestant, Christian,
Sure.
conservative home, well, what we just reinforced is, don't tell me stuff that I disagree with morally, or I can't. And so it just creates this barrier, right? And so we get surprised when kids get in the car and go, good. But how have we fostered, right? How have we opened up and created a place for them to come home and go, well, I had a really crappy day.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, let's talk about that. Why?
Yeah.
Well, have we ever done that?
Right.
Have we ever explained why we're feeling what we're feeling to our kids? Or do we just go, not right now, I'm tired. I need to go sit down for a bit.
Right. Yeah. That's challenging, and we'll get to kind of the parent side of that, but let's kind of look at students as far as, okay, so you're feeling that way rightly because we failed you, because we're
human.
Yeah, we're human. How would you encourage students to push past that? I mean, because to a degree, yes, it's been modeled, we have failed, and parents need to push past that as well. We need to do our part, which we'll get to, but let's say your parents will never do that. Why should they push past that, and how can they? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think one of the things we need to remember is that students are far more capable than we give them credit for. Our culture keeps moving the line back further to when they're adults, to when they're independent. And you look at 25-year-olds and you're like,
right.
Anyway. But
enough said.
Yeah. But I don't think we give them enough credit for what they're capable of. There's lots of stories out there of 16-year-olds who start businesses, and or one girl, there's a famous girl, she was 16 years old and she got introduced to missions, and at 18, when she graduated, she just moved there and started doing missions and killed it. And so they're far more capable than we give them credit for. I would communicate to students, parents are a gift and a blessing, and it is awesome if you have that. Not all of us did. And so there are people who want to do life with you, who want to be present for you, who want to be able to answer those questions and have those conversations. If you don't have parents, or if you have parents who are absent or parents who are distracted, they're not the only relationship that exists, right? So thank God that we have churches like ours that have a youth pastor, we have so many. We have nearly 30 volunteers who work with junior high, high school, and young adults.
Right.
They just want to invest in kids on a weekly basis.
Right.
And so my encouragement to a student would be get into those relationships. At the same time, I would tell a student who comes from a strong Christian home, who has parents intact, who are present, who are loving them, who are pursuing them, to lean into those volunteers. It's the old adage, it takes a village.
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
And so I'd say, regardless of where you're at in your relationships in the home, uh, the shepherd, whether it's a volunteer or a pastor, has great value
Mm.
in reinforcing or modeling and showing you, maybe for the first time, uh, what a healthy relationship looks like
Mm.
between people,
Mhm.
engaging thought, making decisions. And so that would be the biggest thing I can say is you need to get into a relationship. I had a girl come up to me last night. We had HSM last night,
Okay.
first time at church, and she came up and she said, "I want to know more about Christianity."
Hmm.
And she said, "What do I do to find out more?" And so everything I said, I said, "Well, I would get plugged into HSM. We're talking about this every week. Get plugged into our HSM groups where you can ask questions. Get plugged into our life groups. Hey, have a meeting with me. One of my female leaders and you and I, can we sit down and have coffee and I can answer whatever questions you got." I realized as I was driving home, processing that uh, it was all communal.
Yeah.
Get involved in HSM. There's a community there.
Right.
Our HSM groups, that's a community. Our life groups is a community. Interact with me, that's relational community. Like
Right.
it's just all about community.
Yeah.
And so that is probably the strongest thing that a student, whether they're in a healthy and intact home or a struggling home, they should plug into the community.
And one thing that comes to my mind is because, as you said, I think rightly so, a lot of students have been failed by parents, or maybe their parents are like, don't do drugs, for instance, or don't have premarital sex.
Those are good things.
Those are great. But some of those parents didn't live up to that standard when they were young.
Yeah.
And students can look and be like, well, you did.
Mm.
My retort to that is, that means they have learned. They learned the value of that. And so they're coming to you and saying, I don't want you to have the heartache and struggle that I had. So don't discount parents' advice or parents' wisdom just because they didn't live up to it, because we're messed up people. And yeah, I've done a lot of stuff in my life that I have a lot of regrets about. And I want to speak from that regret and the growth that came out of that to my kids.
Yep.
And so look at your parents kind of with grace when it comes to some of those kind of things. In the same way that, like, no parent really parents all their kids the same, because each kid is a new experience, and like what works for one, your parents, as much as they might think that they're perfect, they're not. They're also growing in this, and they're trying to figure out how to adapt to you and how to learn. And so we need to have kind of the grace that you want them to show you. You need to have that for them as far as kind of these conversations go. I think there's so much import, is that the right word? To those relationships, as you said, if you have them, because that is such a blessing that is not super common these days. At least that's how it feels, when you hear the news or whatever. Like, divorce rates in the church are kind of mirror images of culture. And so if you have your parents intact, or even if your parents have split or whatever, you have people in your life, use them. Do not push them away, even if they're turds, which sometimes we're turds.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. Teenagers want redemption. They want grace. But sometimes, again, it's that developmental stage. They don't know how to give it. They're not capable of looking at parents and seeing deeper than what's on the surface.
Yeah.
They're just not there yet developmentally. And so, and parents, we fear that they smell our weakness. Okay,
and they do.
Yeah,
as you said, they're sponges. They're absorbing.
They are.
Everything.
And so, what we end up doing is just listen. Just do what I tell you. Don't do drugs.
Yeah.
Okay, just don't do it.
Yeah.
Well, we don't bring into the conversation, hey, here's been my experience.
Right.
We don't explain. We just listen. Right.
Right.
And so students get all angry, upset, offended, frustrated.
Right.
And they feel this disconnect, but often students don't recognize the struggle of the parent.
Mm-hmm.
There's the fear of, well, if I tell them, it might give them permission to go do it.
Sure.
Well, you did it. right? And so a
Yeah.
parent's like, I don't want to tell them the mistakes I've made.
Right.
I don't want them to feel like there's permission then for them to make mistakes.
Or I don't want to talk about sex because I don't want, like.
Sure. Everything from, when I was a kid, it was an act of the devil.
Right.
And so I'm uncomfortable now as an adult even bringing that up. And so to talk about it with my kid, there's no way. We don't talk about that, right? But the parent doesn't know how to vocalize it. And so the kid just thinks their parents are weird about it.
Right.
Even though they're exposed to it every day.
Right.
And so because of a lack of communication in that way, it really makes it hard between the parents and the kids to function in a very healthy way. It takes a lot of effort on the student's part to be understanding of the parent. And it takes a lot of work for the parent to be able to just take a pause and a breath from being at work all day or taking care of the house or the kid or whatever, to take the time to sit down and go, hey, can I share with you why this is hard for me?
Right.
Here's why.
Yeah.
It's just it's a back and forth.
Yeah. My mom did a decent job at modeling stuff. She would say she messed up a lot, but she, out of the two, probably chastised me the most and, would yell at me more or whatever. But she would often, after that, she would come back.
Yes.
And she'd be like, I shouldn't have done that.
Yes.
You not saying what you did was okay. What you did was not okay. And you're still grounded.
Yeah.
Stay in your room, have fun. But I shouldn't have come back, or I shouldn't have come at you in that way.
Yep.
And that's something that I already tried to do with Ada, my 5.5-year-old,
good job,
3.5-year-old. When because there are times when I yell at him and you just see tears welling up and all this kind of stuff. And I have to be like, okay, honey, I'm sorry that I did that, but here's what I'm struggling with. It's hard to eat crow to a 5.5-year-old. It's hard, but I hope, God willing, that is some modeling that she will pick up on.
Yeah. And if I can encourage you, it gets easier. And what I mean by that is now when she's a teenager, those conversations are going to be far easier to have as opposed to if it's your first time.
Sure.
So I've been doing the same thing with my kids since they were the same age. I have this. There's a few things I'm really passionate about. One of them is this.
Oh, okay.
How do we come back from a mistake? I am. This is a big deal for me, and so if I can encourage students, if I can encourage parents, you just for a moment, if we can get off topic, I do a couple things. I put myself below them. I often use the stairs because my kids were always smaller. Now my son's about as tall as me, which is very weird. But I would have them sit on the stairs and I would kneel a couple stairs below. And so I'm looking up at them so that there isn't this towering figure. I'm a big guy, right? And so I would get below them and I would make eye contact. I would say, what just happened? And I'd have them recount. Well, when I punched my brother in the throat, that made you angry. Yes, it did make me angry. Something like that. We have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
And I would address the problem at hand and what the consequences are going to be.
Right.
But I would finish with two things. I am sorry that I raised my voice at you.
Yeah.
I reacted because I didn't like what I saw. I don't have to react that way.
Right.
But I'm going to get better. And I hope you can forgive me for yelling at you.
Yeah.
I forgive you for punching your brother in the throat. Once this dialogue finishes, this is really big for me, man. I grab my kid by the arms and I'm looking up at them and I go, I love you. I love you. And then I hold them and I let them cry because they feel so bad. But then I let them go, okay, we're done. We can move on now. You're going to have your consequence. You know I love you. It's all done.
Right.
In other words, I'm not going to bring it up in 5 minutes.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
So there's closure. I've been able to forgive.
It'll be hard if he punches him in the throat again.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So anyway, I say that to go, I mean, it's such
great.
good modeling. Now, my 14-year-old, gosh, it was a couple weeks ago I did something. And I had to go back to him. I don't remember all the details right now, but I had to go back to him and go, Gavin, that wasn't right. The way I responded, not healthy. I'm really sorry for that. I am going to work on that.
Yeah.
That is so much easier now.
Totally.
Than if I had not had those conversations over the last decade, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's great you're doing it. I hope you continue.
It reminds me of, so I wouldn't say struggled with, but like when I first had my girls, I wanted to have like a sweet name for them that was like just for them. And I settled on a pretty easy one. It was just my love, like my love or Lovey or whatever. But when I was out in public, saying that felt really awkward.
Yeah.
Like it was like a little weird.
Okay.
And I would like, I'm at like Winco and I'm like, come here, love, or, whatever. And like, you just feel weird because like people are like hearing, like, what? But now it's just like, I can't say anything else. Yep. Like it just, it rolls off. Like you get into a rhythm, and when that's established, I think when it comes to parenting, and I feel like you basically said this, but it is about a level of intentionality and purpose.
Yep.
One thing I do with my girls every night, and it's funny because like the nighttime thing just keeps getting like longer and longer. At first it was like a book, kiss goodnight, whatever, and then Auntie added the kiss and snuggle, and so I was like, okay, now it's a book and a kiss and snuggle, and then it was like kiss, snuggle, hug, whatever.
Soon it's going to be a whole Broadway show, right?
Right. Hello, my baby. And I extended it much to the chagrin of like people who babysat and like Bethany at first, because it like takes forever. But like just affirming that they're beautiful and brave and creative, intelligent, like all of these things that I feel like kids don't get that. And now like both my girls every night, I make sure to do that, and I pray before I leave. Yeah. And Bethany at first was like, oh, it's like so long, but they want it every time. I'm like, I know, I get it. I'll go in and do it. But I think that intentionality, and that's not to elevate me or whatever, but just as a parent, being intentional with those kind of things. Hey, light shut off.
Yeah, I see that.
It is so important as far as the kids go, because now Ada asks for it.
Yeah.
And she's like, I want my daddy kisses. That's what she called my whole 10-minute spiel to her. Like, because in between those, I'm giving her a kiss on the forehead. Yeah. And I just think when it comes to raising a teenager as a parent, having that intentionality, having that willingness to engage with them, to be authentic with your struggle, all that kind of stuff is so stinking important.
Yeah, it seems like in most areas of our life, we plan ahead. If we've got a vacation, we're going to plan ahead. We're going to find out where we want to go, what we want to do when we're there. We're going to look for the hotel with the cheapest rate. We're going to do all that stuff, right? With our businesses, we are going to plan ahead. If we don't plan ahead with our businesses, things are going to struggle, right? So anytime, we have a phrase when I was in the military, it was the 5 Ps. Poor planning prevents peak performance.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so unfortunately, what ends up happening in teenager homes, there was no class on parenting. There was no one coming alongside and saying, all right, you're about to have a kid, so here's some things that you need to be planning and work. We just kind of go with it. And then everybody's aware of this. We just don't bring it up very often. There's a sense of comfort. And when you're in comfort, you let things slide a lot more, right? What is home? Comfort. So we go to work all day. We put on a face. We perform. We do what we got to do, right? And then we come home and we're like, we'll let them slide, right? And I get it. I mean, I do it more than most people probably. But the missing element, and this is really hard for if you're a parent of a teenager now. I have parents come to me and go, hey, help me fix this. And part of me internally, I can't say this because I'm a youth pastor, but I'll say it on video. It's almost too late. It's not too late. But, man, if you had been doing these things when they were 6 and 7 and 10, right? So I hope some younger parents could watch this too and hear this. Poor planning prevents peak performance. And if we're not investing in our kids that way at a younger age, it's going to get really hard to do that when they're teenagers and they're pissing us off. Oh, do you censor? Can we censor? When...
Use that audio to censor him.
Is there a way to like invest in them at an earlier age so that it's not as uncomfortable or awkward or as draining when they're older? I think that is a really important aspect of parenting. And again, for teenagers, hopefully, that are engaged in this conversation, there's grace there.
Mm-hmm.
There's grace there that there was no class on parenting.
Right.
That sometimes we as parents, we're still trying to internalize our own childhood. We're still trying to internalize things that have happened in our lives and how that comes out sideways in our relationships.
Yeah.
And without us being really being intentional and having the time to do that, it is going to come out sideways sometimes.
Yeah.
Not because it's the kid's fault, but
Yeah.
because we're growing too, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a little grace needed on the child's part in that. But man, intentionality it's critical.
Totally. So, yeah, I mean, you talked about engaging with, your kids and stuff like that. A lot of times it can be difficult to start those conversations, whether it's on like kind of a sticky subject like sex or pornography or anything like that, or just kind of real life stuff that's beyond how was your day, whatever. Do you, and maybe I can just say, how do you do it with students? But ultimately, do you have kind of any advice for parents who like are hearing this and they're saying like, man, I really do need to engage, but I don't even know how to start those conversations, whatever.
Yeah. There's another number of things. One is tied to the intentionality piece. Another is tied to reality. So, intentionality piece, I would say, if you are creating an atmosphere of conversation throughout life,
right,
that is going to help. And here's some examples of what I mean. We go on a family vacation. Most people are going to do that in 2021. Well, after the pandemic. Sure. But back in the day, it seemed like nobody went on family vacations except for the rich people, except for the rich people. But now it seems like a lot of families, it seems like a lot of people do vacation of some sort. What is the follow-up to that vacation? Right?
Correct,
So
yeah.
do you just get in the car and drive home? Or do you just get on the plane and fly home and then you just go about your life? Or do you sit down when you get back and go, hey, let's get on Snapfish? That's a plug for Snapfish. They are an advertiser of the podcast here at Church of the Foot. No, I'm just kidding.
Is Snapfish a real thing?
I think so.
Because I literally don't know.
I think Snapfish is, or it's there's
is it
Snapfish
like a photo?
Yeah, and
okay.
they make personalized mugs. They make
Okay.
shirts. But one of the things they do that I absolutely love is they make picture books. They make photo albums.
Right.
So to sit down with one of your kids, both of your kids, all of your kids.
That's a fun idea.
Yeah, not for 5 hours.
Sure.
But hey, we're on the plane home. Let's drop some photos into Snapfish to create. Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. We got to put that photo in.
Right.
When Jaden jumped off that rock, the look on his face, right?
Right.
We're talking.
Right.
We're recapping without being awkward the vacation we just had.
Totally.
Students need time to process. They can't think as quickly as we do.
Right.
And when they do, they usually say something stupid, right? And so they need time to think. But if you can naturally engage them in a conversation like that, so if you sit down and go, what was your favorite part of the trip? The ice cream store. That's it? I spent $5,000 on Disneyland tickets. Like, what do you, right?
I got strawberry ice cream, Dad.
Yeah. But then we're sitting there, we're putting these photos in a Snapfish, and it's like, oh my gosh, when Jaden jumped off that rock, and then all of a sudden Gavin's like, I know, and when he hit the rock at the bottom of the water, and he was bleeding out, and you had to put a tourniquet on his leg, I'm like, yeah, that happened. Right?
Not my favorite part.
I know. But now they're processing.
Yeah.
They're able, you're kind of queuing them up.
Right.
So that's that type of thing. Now that's just one example. There's lots of ways you can do that. But that's an example of something that I enjoy is creating these books. But also what I like about the books is next year you can grab that book, pull it off. Or if it's out on the coffee table, it's something to look back on and go, oh, remember? Those types of.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other thing I think about being intentional and how do you create space for those conversations? Again, I know we're talking about teens, but we want to be ahead of the curve. So if there are younger parents with younger kids watching, one of the things that we have lost as a society and that I think has a huge effect, massive effect on our anxiety, our depression, our identity issues is the loss of ceremony. Here's what I mean by that. If you look around the world at all the different cultures, they have ceremony, quinceañeras, right?
Sure. Yeah.
That's a great example. But all cultures have this. Tribes in Africa still have this. Tribes in the Amazon have this.
Right.
We have cultures in America that we don't even realize. Ceremonies, getting your license, right? The graduation party.
Yeah.
These are ceremonies that are just not well thought out. So what I would encourage parents to do is to start these ceremonies younger. So, for instance, we have one about 7 or 8 in our home, but then the real big one starts at 10 years old. And we take the kid away for the weekend. So, each one of them gets to choose where they go. I give them the options of the mountains, the beach, or like a city. Where do you? So we go off for the weekend. Because it's a son, it's me. If it's a girl, it's my wife. And we take them off and do a 3-day thing. Well, on that trip, we present them with something. And we have a conversation about sex, about their body, about something that's coming up in life that they need to be prepared for. I'll use the 10-year-old example with my oldest son. I bought all of my kids a Swiss Army knife, but it's Leatherman. I bought them a Leatherman. And I had it engraved with their name and the year that they got it. I then go and I spend the weekend just doing fun stuff. We hike, or we go and have dinner at a special restaurant, just the two of us. And I am intentionally speaking life into this kid the whole time. I say things like, I am so proud of you, period. I don't say because of your hair or you have my looks. I don't do any of that. I just go, I'm sitting at dinner and we're eating and it's quiet. And I just look at him and go, I am so proud of you. And then I keep eating. I've had my kids ask me why. And I look at them and I go, because of who you are, because of your character. I love how God has designed you. I never tie it to you're athletic, you're smart. I don't create a checklist for them to, I just go, no, because of who your character is. And then I present them the next day on Saturday with this Leatherman. And I explain that the reason I give them a Leatherman is that this has a knife, it's got scissors, it's got a saw, it's got tweezers, it's got all these things, right? All these tools that can be used for good. It's multifaceted. Right. Well, you're multifaceted. You have all these tools. You have your brain, you have your hands, you have your sexuality. And I start to introduce that topic. And it can be used for good and great things. Well, it can also be used for pain and destruction and hurt. And just like a knife can cut, our words can cut. Right. And I start having these conversations. Sure. Yeah. And I always, at the 10-year-old, I introduce to them the idea of you're different because you're a boy. You're not a girl. You have different parts. And I start to explain how their body works. And I just leave it there. We don't go into pornography. I just introduce the topic. Well, then their next one is at 12, right? And so then we start talking a little bit more about some of the dangers that are out there. And then they get a shield. And so the whole focus of that weekend is defense. You need to defend yourselves from the attacks of the world. You need to care about yourself. So what's going to harm you? Well, pornography is going to harm you. What's pornography? Well, people have taken something and they've twisted it. Let me explain what. Right? So as they get older, they get something that's an image, a symbol, but they also get conversation. Well, what that does then is when my kid comes up to me and asks me, which they have, sorry if this is weird, Dad, what's masturbation? I can go, okay, well, do you remember when we talked about... Right. You see how that creates...
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
space.
It does. And so for that, and this can be guys, it can be girls, it doesn't matter what kind of kids you have. And I would encourage people to tailor it to their child or the values that they have. But by doing that, by creating ceremonies, we are not only speaking life into them, we're also forming their identity with them. So they're confused. They're trying to figure things out. But if we came alongside and had these intentional conversations about how you are good, right? Who you are is great. You can hurt, you can do good, and showing them those different ways. Right. I think that will open up for greater conversation later. When they come home going, man, this kid said that I'm dumb. Right. Well, why would they say that? I don't know. Well, do you believe you're dumb? Well, no. I mean, because God's designed me. We talked about that. Right, and I can reference things we've talked about before. Right. So that's super big. So ceremonies, I think it's something that we've lost. I think it's something that families need to be reinstating. I don't care if you've got a 17-year-old or 8-year-old. Yeah. You could do it now.
Yeah, I mean, dinner every night at the table can kind of be a ceremony, and
yeah,
you can use that to plant seeds and all that stuff. I try to be very intentional, like not having my phone at the dinner table or something like that, and if my girls like want to play with me, I'll be like, okay, in like 15 minutes you got me for half an hour. I've started giving my phone to Ada and starting the Siri thing, and I say, Ada, set an alarm for 30 minutes from now, and she'll say it, and it sets it, so she's in charge of it. And then I put the phone to the side, and I'm like,
that's
you
super
got
cool.
me for 30 minutes, whatever. Because a lot of times, like when they ask me to play with them, I'm like half playing with them.
Yeah.
And so I was convicted on that, so I've kind of started doing this other thing. I think the ceremony thing is an awesome idea, and just to piggyback off that, basically, is just even when you're not doing those ceremonies, planting those seeds, as far as conversational things about topics like that you can reference back to, I think is also great. Yeah. Now, I know one thing that, and we'll wrap pretty soon because we've been chatting for a while. It's been great. You've done great, by the way. There are certain battles that I think parents have with their kids, and they kind of struggle with, okay, I'm seeing this. Is this something I confront my student on? Is this the hill that I die on, as it were? Or is this something that I kind of let go, like I let pass? I mean, if you see pictures of me from back in the day,
I have.
Yes. And they're glorious.
Yes.
Like,
oh my gosh.
I had like crazy hair, I was like the rocker kid. I had spikes, I had almost dreads, I had all sorts of things. Hairstyle was not a hill that my parents chose to die on.
And it shows.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Still? Dang it. So when it comes to, but I do know there are parents that if their kid would have had hair like that, they'd have been like, you can't do that, because that's modeled after blah, 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 whatever. And those maybe are legitimate grievances. Maybe it's parents and like kind of their upbringing or their history had that.
Yep.
And they're trying to separate you from that history. How do you kind of choose which battles to fight and which ones not to? I mean, ultimately, all of it should be talked about and discussed. What's your motivation for getting a tattoo, earrings, whatever? All that should be discussed, but how do you kind of decide the hill to die on and the not?
Yeah, so sense? I am a big, when it comes to perspective, that really matters to me. And here's what I mean by that. We have the typical optimist, pessimist. Everybody knows about that. Like, oh, they're generally just angry about everything, right? Or we have these things, and I go, I think we need to adjust our perspective. I cannot tell you how many people. Here's an example. I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. I have some junior hires. I have done junior high ministry for a really long time. I love junior hires. But what is the big joke in the church?
Junior hires? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what do we say from the stage? Hey, we're looking for junior high volunteers. Or they'll take it a step further and go, I mean, who would do that? Like, who would
chuckle?
Yeah, right. People will say something like, "Gosh, you got to be special to work with junior higher," right? Yeah. You know what? We're actually projecting a worldview. We're projecting a perspective that I think is super unhealthy.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that is something that we need to take into consideration in all areas of our lives. Is what is our perspective? Are we a doom and gloom, or are we a hopeful? Like, I see hope in this. Well, I feel the same way when it comes to teenagers. And I think that people often talk about their kids or home with a sense of, I mean, you've heard it where they go, "Oh, you have teenagers now?"
Glad
Right?
I'm past that phase.
Right? Or,
Yeah.
well, when you have teenage, and I just go, is it hard? Yes. Is it hard having a 2-year-old? Yes. Like, is it hard having adult children? Yes. Like, it's just every stage. And so I go, how about we change our perspective and our language instead of thinking that our teenager is going to be a battle or a fight? How about we recognize it as, I have a period of time to invest in and to train up this incredible person.
Right.
And they're in a developmental stage where they are processing and they're pushing boundaries. They're trying to figure out who they are. Again, I'm pushing the ceremony thing, but
Sure.
but when you at different ages explain to your child, you now have more freedom in this area, it lessens those battles, those fights.
Sure.
So if we were to rethink how we look at the 4 years of high school or the 2 or 3 years of middle school as an opportunity to invest in a future adult that we want to hang out with, right? It will change a lot. I'm not saying that's easy, and I'm not saying that there aren't arguments or battles. So that's my first thing, is let's watch our perspective and how we view these years, okay?
Let me piggyback on that. Don't lose your train of thought.
I already did. It's gone.
Well, and I mean, to challenge parents, especially parents who are married or whatever, I think a lot of times culturally we use those adages like the old ball and chain or my goofy husband or whatever. And how crazy would it be if at your place of work or whatever, when husbands are griping about their wives or vice versa, you were the voice of, man, my wife's awesome.
Yep.
She just did this amazing creative thing, whatever. Like, again, those perspectives that we have glommed onto as culture. Because, you know, sometimes stereotypes come from a place, but they're also kind of self-fulfilling.
Yes.
Like, and you perpetuate that. And so maybe you should stop doing that.
Yep.
I also like the young adult age. And this is like a weird thing for a licensed pastor to say to a student. But when they're asking questions about God and they're questioning him, I'm like, you are in an exciting place right now.
Yep.
Now, I could come at them and be like, oh, you shouldn't question that. That's not good. Like, because God is true and the Bible is true and all these things. But I'm like, you are in a place where you're internalizing this.
Yep.
And that's awesome, because I believe my God is big and I believe my God is true and right and strong. And he is going to bring you through this, and you're going to have a personal, vibrant relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, they're going to do it no matter what.
Right.
Whether they vocalize it or not, they're internalizing. Right. You've got to create an environment where you empower, you don't defeat.
Right.
So often the stereotype is that students argue.
Yeah.
Well, I would twist that upside down.
Sure.
Okay, a gift I see in you is your ability to think quickly and articulate.
Totally.
Have you tried the debate team?
Yeah.
You like to argue. It's not I'm not doing a, what is that called? Where a passive aggressive, like backhanded compliment. No.
Sure.
You genuinely, you caused me to stumble sometimes with my words because I'm like, wow, that was really smart.
Right.
Hey, you should consider debate club.
Right.
Right. So we need to just shift our perspective in how we view what our children are processing.
Yeah.
A phrase, again, from the military when I was in Afghanistan was adapt or perish. Right? So instead of being stuck in our ways, and this is just how it is, and you just do what I say, and I don't want your hair to be faux hawk or mohawk that's blue, and go, okay, well, how can I actually create an outlet for them to be creative?
Right.
So you like color, you like vibrant, different. Have you taken an art class yet?
Yeah.
It would be awesome to see what you paint.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know how to paint. Well, yeah, but you have it internally. You obviously are excited about different things, so why don't you go learn how?
Right.
Right. So there's a different perspective there. Okay, I know I kind of got off, but
Well,
the question
I took you there, don't worry.
the question of how do you pick your battles, and I just go, I don't. I invest. If I have to just go, and I know there's going to be parents who go, well, Doug, sometimes they just need to listen. I agree, they do. We want to teach them to respect. We want to teach them to obey. I am all about all of that. But again, I'm trying to look at a long term. And I don't want to just tell my kids to do what I say because of who I am.
Right.
But I want them to respect and to value my thought process.
Right.
And then I want them to be able to have a thought process.
Right.
Because if I'm gone tomorrow in a car accident, or if they're 24, they just graduated college, and then I get cancer and die, right? Like,
Right.
I hope that they've picked up how to process and do life.
Right.
Right. So, I would take everything as a different perspective. It's not a fight. It's not a battle. It's, hey, you're really trying to figure out how to manage time in sports. You really want to be on the football team, and if you miss a practice on a Wednesday night, you say they're going to get kicked off. Well, I'm not going to fight with them about this. We're going to have a conversation. So how do we pick the things that we value? Who do we allow to influence our values? Where do we draw lines and boundaries in our life that are healthy? Not that create laziness, not that create busyness, but that are healthy, right? So I start to engage in them, and I give them an opportunity to come to the table with their thoughts and to process out loud. Two big mistakes that parents do is they lecture and they shut down. They shut down their kid and they lecture them, and it doesn't give them a voice. And then we wonder why in the marriage people have difficulties conversing with their spouse. They shut down or they lecture, right? And so your wife shuts down, or your wife just lectures, and you shut down, right? Like it, because that's what we all saw as teenagers. Well, what if we did it different, right? What if we engaged them in the conversation? They don't look at it as a fight, but why do you want your hair to look like that?
Right.
We think internally that it's because you're going to go around back later and shoot up some meth, right? Well, that may not be what Bryce was thinking at 14 years old with a blue mohawk. Right? It was, I think it looks cool. That's it? You just think it looks cool?
Yeah.
I guess so, sure.
Yeah.
This isn't because you want to go be a drug addict?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We have these preconceived ideas in our head, and sometimes it's easier for us just to put the foot down and say no to something without even considering why they want to do what they do or where they got the idea of what they want to do. Instead, we let fear dictate how we raise our children, and that's just not healthy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, with all things, I really try to not let fear be the guiding principle. And that could be, not to get political, but that could be vaccine stuff. That could be, do I want to take my kids out of public school because public school is going to turn them into blah, 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 blah. Like, are you making that decision out of fear, or are you making that decision out of like kind of a reasonable, prayerful mindset? Like we have to check those motivations. I want to say one thing, and then I want to ask you, just to cue you up, some potential resources that parents, books, podcasts, whatever. But we've talked a lot about, kind of teens and parents, but there is a role for us as the church to come alongside teenagers. One could be volunteering in HSM or JHM or young adults, even young marrieds. I mean, because even they need that as well. So I do want to at least put that call out there. Like, if something in this is like tugged you, respond. Like, reach out to Doug, reach out to Buddy, whatever. And beyond that, even if you're not doing it officially through some Foothills ministry, I have a strong belief that everyone should have someone that's mentoring them and that they're mentoring.
Yep.
There's a huge role for mentorship in our church. That's one reason I really love multi-generational churches, because even someone my age has someone older than them that they can receive wisdom from. I currently work in the office, so that's pretty easy. I can just be like, Phil, help, whatever. Like I have that built in my workplace, which a lot of people don't. But one, if you're watching this and you don't have someone older than you, find that person. And if you are in that older stage, find someone younger than you that you can kind of safely mentor and come alongside them. Because I think that's such, as you said, takes a village. It's kind of that idea. I mean, if you look at Jesus, he mentored people. All the apostles mentored people. They were mentored by Jesus. It's like, if you use, like, you can look at cycling or whatever. If you use that visual metaphor of the peloton, you have that person in the front and they're taking on the wind of that race that they're creating, and everyone is behind them. They're drafting off them, and those people behind them are able to match speed but exert like 1/3 less energy. And at some point, that leader moves to the back and the person behind them now takes the lead because they've been built up over time. So I would really encourage you guys to take that role in the lives of students. I think that'll be super helpful and beneficial for them. And so I just want to challenge you with that. So now I'll move back over to you as far as.
Yeah, I guess two things I want to throw out there. It is really easy to say things. It's a lot harder to do things.
Yes.
And so a lot of things that we talked about today, a parent could walk away going, crap. You know what I mean? Oh, sorry. But I don't want people to be discouraged. This is a journey. Yeah. And what we don't know and what we don't realize we can't do, right?
Yeah.
So this is merely a conversation, hopefully opening our eyes to things that we hadn't considered before, we hadn't thought through before. And so one, I'd say just please don't be discouraged.
Totally.
Don't be discouraged. The modeling, the mentoring that has happened for some hasn't happened for others for whatever reason. And the only reason, if you know anything about my story and my background, I should be divorced. I should not be with my children. My life should be completely different than it is. But Christ got me. And then he put people in my life when I was a young Christian to develop me and to train me and to model for me what it looks like to be a godly parent. I'm not saying that I'm doing it right all the time, but a lot of these tools I learned from those mentors, watching them engage their children, watching how they deal with conflict, and then going, I want that for my kids. So that I just want to share that with you.
Totally.
That it's a process and that it's a journey.
Yeah.
So that's just one thing. Give yourself grace. If you're a student watching this, I cannot beg enough that you give your parents grace.
For sure.
We are not all psychologists.
We're doing it for the first time too.
Right. And so we don't have the introspection necessarily to realize why we do what we do, when we do it, and how we do it. We just do it. Right. So give parents grace.
Tread in water sometimes.
Right. So that's one. As far as resources go, it's hard to put a blanket resource out there. Books that have influenced me would be like Raising a Modern Day Knight or Bringing Up Boys. Focus on the Family is huge for resources on parents. Family Life is huge for resources on parents. Jim Burns, who's an author, he is great for marriages and parenting. So there's some books out there, but I guess probably what I would encourage, since we're talking about it taking a village, is if you're not in a small group at the church, at your church, wherever you're at, you need to be in one. Students were not meant to do life alone. Well, none of us were meant to do life alone. We're meant to do it in community. And so a lot of the conversations that we're having, a lot of this happens over a cup of coffee on a Sunday or on a Tuesday morning. So I'd really encourage you to get into that. Get into a small group. You have at Foothills Church, you have youth pastors, you have family pastors. So I'm going to encourage you to also tap into that. If you have questions or if something we talked about, you're like, I never considered ceremony. I never considered being that intentional with my conversations after a vacation, whatever. Shoot us an email. Say, hey, I would love to sit down and pick your brain on how I can start ceremonies with a 17-year-old. It's totally doable. Yeah. Or, man, I've created a relationship with my kid unintentionally where we just don't talk well. How can we start to change that? I just so happen to have conversation starters that I can give you. I've got these cards that I can give you that when you pick your kid up from school or they get home or you're sitting at the dinner table, you could look at this card and say, hey, Allison, and then you have a conversation. We have tools, and so please utilize your pastors as well. It's what we want to do for you.
Totally.
So those are some resources I'd say.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Well, guys, I would also encourage you to reach out to us through email. You can hit us up on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube comments, whatever. Love to hear your thoughts. Maybe you can share some wisdom with us because we're pretty young. And so I'm sure you guys have some wisdom that we can learn from and glean from. Thank you, Doug, so much for doing this. I personally think you did amazing. So
thanks, Bryce.
For what it's
I was
worth.
A little insecure.
Yeah, no, I mean, so thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. I think our next podcast is going to be with Celebrate Recovery.
Oh, nice.
So we're going to be talking about their ministry and just, Oh.
I had another resource. I forgot to mention, but
hit
that
me with
reminded
it.
me. I'm so sorry.
Totally ruining my flow, Doug.
I know, my bad. I was going to say counseling.
Oh.
I'm a firm believer that all teenagers should be in counseling.
And parents.
Well, I'm sorry. Yes.
Literally
of course.
everyone.
I really believe, I really think that's a huge value.
Sure.
And so I would throw that resource in there as well. We have a list of counselors that we recommend, Christian counselors that we recommend people to. And so I would encourage you to contact us for that list and to get yourself or your kids into counseling. That's a big deal.
100%.
It kind of, not to make this longer, but it's the strangest thing. Like a parent can tell their kid not to run out in the middle of the road and get hit by a bus. And then the kid runs out in the road and gets hit by a bus. But a youth pastor says don't do it, and they don't do it. Right? You go to a counselor and they're like, you shouldn't run out in the middle of the road. And they go, oh, okay. It's the weirdest thing. I don't get it. But they are super helpful. And so if you want to get your kid into counseling, want to get you into counseling, I highly recommend it. We've got resources for you. Okay, sorry. Celebrate Recovery next week.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of that too.
Yeah. So be checking out for that. And thank you again. See you guys later.
Peace.